Hello, I'm Richard Burton from the Richard Burton Watercolour channel near Bempton on the Yorkshire coast, and today we've got the autumnal colours. Colours are changing and we're going to capture an autumnal scene at Sowerby Hall. This painting here that I did in a class earlier this week, which is the morning mist. You've got the sunlight coming through the trees and you're going to capture some really realistic trees and some sort of early morning mood, and nothing better than watercolour to capture that. And I'm going to show you in some simple steps how we can really capture not only the morning mist and the atmosphere, but some really realistic trees. Now today's painting is a bit of a hybrid. A lot of you like the non-time-lapse approach, and we're trying to incorporate that as much as we possibly can. However, we want to keep the video manageable in time length, but what we've done here today is the key elements you'll see in real time, and then obviously we've sped up little bits in between. So hopefully you'll enjoy this. This is a hybrid approach, and let's get down to the painting. Also, we've got this free watercolour guide which we've been working on for some time now. We've got over 1,000 people using it, which is great. It's a free copy, it's in the link below. What it is, if you're new to watercolour or you're coming back to watercolour from a long time away, please use it. It's really helpful. It's 5 steps into watercolour, and we get a lot of positive feedback, so grab yourself a copy. Okay, so today we're at Sowerby Hall on the Yorkshire coast, and Sowerby Hall is a really grand venue, and it's very atmospheric because we're into the autumn time. It's parkland's got wonderful colours of trees, and we're going to capture those autumn scenes. These pictures now show the setting of the location with the open plains looking towards a bowling green that overlooks the sea. And the actual picture we're going to utilise is going to be one of a winter scene, a winter morning scene, looking through the trees, a misty sunrise coming through the trees. And it's going to be quite an atmospheric. So we're going to be really into mood and atmosphere today, and it's going to be a really interesting picture to capture. Okay, so let's start with the sketch, and let's plan the composition. I like the view, very much so, we're looking into the light, but I'm also conscious that I'm going to try and make the trees suit the composition, which we can do as artists. And there's a dead tree in the middle, which I think is a little bit too much in the centre, so I'm actually going to take that out. I'm not going to have that there, and we're going to focus my eye down the path, through the trees, and down to the bowling pavilion, and that will then work up to the sky. That'll make a lovely composition. So with that in mind, we're going to start with the horizon line, making sure that we've got horizon line way below midpoint, so it's sort of like a 1/3 land, 2/3 sky. And then from that, I'm then going to work in the buildings and ensure that I get the buildings as reasonably accurate as I can for the size and scale of the location. And then from that, I'm then going to put the trees and just get a feel for the trees. I'm not going to put all the small branches. When I'm going to put the trees, I'm going to put those central trees that I think are going to be the important ones that I need to include. And I'm also wanting to make sure that I've get enough of the tree, but not going to go into the small branches, because obviously there's far too many, and we're going to paint those. We're going to draw those with a paintbrush. And then obviously I'm going to finish off with the pathway that leads my eye into the picture. And that should complete the drawing. Okay, so let's have a look at the brushes. I'm going to use a large wash brush, and then I'm going to have 2 medium-sized brushes, which are going to be around about 10s, and then I'm going to finish off with a small brush, and probably even have a couple of small brushes, just so I can get the details. And the important thing is to capture the big areas of wash, and then finish off with the details. Now I set out the colour story, and then we're going to do these big washes, which are going to set the mood and the atmosphere for the painting, starting with the centre of the sun and then working the way out from there. And the colours we're going to work initially are going to be cadmium yellow, a pale wash of cadmium yellow, followed by a similar pale wash of cadmium red. And then I'm going to want some cobalt blue. Now cobalt blue wants to be reasonably strong, but it's going to cascade away from the centre out into the wider sky. So I want to have quite a bit of that because it's going to be covering quite a large area. And that's going to be set in the centre of my palette. So I'm going to be dabbing into these colours as we go, but at least it sets the story in place. Following from that, I'm then going to the cobalt turquoise, which is going to be coming down into the playing field and the area. That's important that I get that first sort of set in the green. That's going to be a lovely colour that will sort of capture the mood for the green. And then I'm going to finish off with raw umber, which will be really useful to capture the trees in the distance and that feeling of mood and atmosphere in the distant trees that are in the haze of the sky. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is wet the paper and leave some clear dry area in the middle for that winter sun that's coming through the sky and coming through the trees. That's going to be the brightest part. Now I'm going to wet that area and then start with some cadmium yellow. Drop that in, let that diffuse around. It will create a hard edge here or there against the white, which will be fine, but it's going to diffuse. It's going to create that initial colour change from the white to the yellow. After I've done that, I'm going to wet it a little bit further out as I go and then start to introduce the cadmium red. And the cadmium red will give a further colour change and that feeling of that wintry, misty sunrise coming through the trees. And that's important that we can capture those. I don't want to bleed all these colours together, otherwise we'll end up with a little bit of a mud. But the important thing is I get that clear, diffused distinction between the white in the centre, the yellow, and that pink on the outside of that. I'm going to gradually work that through, just add that in as I go. And then once I've got to that stage, I will then start to introduce the cobalt blue and work that across to create that lovely feeling of the bluer sky, which will work wonderful against the bright sunrise that's coming through the trees. As I'm into the blue, I'm also going to move to a bigger brush, so I'm going on to my size 16, so I've got a decent wash brush. I'm going to work that through and then cascade that out into the wider sky and ensure that it's all done onto a moist surface, so I get that variation of colour, but it transitions. It doesn't have hard edges. I don't want tide marks in the sky. I want a nice smooth transition of colour, and that's done by ensuring that the surface is moist and damp, but I also put that clear colour on there, so we get that diffusion of colour, but we also get that transition of colour from the blue on the outside to the red, pink and the yellow in the centre. Now we're going to start putting the land in, and we're going to start with the distant trees, and that's going to be a raw umber and a cadmium red, just to sort of drop those in. It's all going to be done onto a moist surface to ensure that there is an element of diffusion, and it wants to be moist, not wet, so that the colours will hold their shape but will have that diffused feel about them. Will give that feeling of light that's diffusing the trees, so there's no definition. On the edges, I'm going to add a little bit more blue, so that there's a little bit more blue, and then I'm going to have a warmer raw umber look in the centre. So you've got warm on the centre, cool on the outside, and that should hopefully all go on onto a moist surface. And then as I come forward, I'm going to work in some cobalt turquoise and cadmium yellow and put the greens in. That'll be the bowling green and the sort of land beyond the trees. Once again, I'm going to try and keep it nice and warm in the centre with a little bit more yellow, and add a little bit more blue on the outsides. Also a little bit of purple on the outside as well, just so we get that transition of colour. But again, it's all going to be on the moist surface, so it's all diffusing. I'm going to gradually work my way into the foreground with a little bit more of the cobalt turquoise and the raw umber, and bring that forward. And then as I come forward, I'm under the trees. I'm going to try and introduce that lovely feeling of the autumnal colours of the trees, of the leaves on the ground. I'm going to use this lovely golden brown, which will nicely cascade into the foreground, in amongst the greens, and give some lovely warmth and effect to the ground and there. And also I'm going to add some purples in place, a bit of crimson, and I'm also going to make a deeper green as well, which is going to be cobalt turquoise, alizarin crimson, and the raw umber. Putting those together, I'll get some real definition, and I'll get some depth into the foreground, so it'll make my eye want to work my way through, and you'll get that transition of colour as you go through from the foreground to the distance. Now we've let it dry, and now we're going to make a couple of darks. Ultramarine burnt umber or burnt sienna with a little bit of crimson will make a nice strong dark for the trees. And I'm also going to have some yellow ochre, which is going to give me that initial wash for the trees, which will give some warmth in the trees. And this is the magic about the trees here now, because what we're going to do is we're going to use these two colours and create a real three-dimensional feel. And what we do, we start off by dropping in a wash of yellow ochre into the tree trunk and some of the surrounding branches, particularly ones that are overlooking the sun, that sort of area. I can use my big brush initially, and then the small brush for the smaller branches. Put those in, and then what we do is we get the darker colour, and then while it's still on the damp, we drop this dark in. And what it does, not only does it diffuse in to create the feeling of a tree trunk, but it also creates texture, and it creates that feeling of the tree trunks as well, and the bark and the effect, and it works really well. It needs to be done on a damp surface, not a wet surface. And then when you get that in, you just work your way through the tree, and then you use a smaller brush to put all the smaller branches in, not the very small branches, but you get the sort of subdivided branches. And then as I build up the size of the tree, I also drop some extra dark bits, particularly where there's joins of the branches. You get some extra dark bits in there as well. And I also come back to the central tree trunk as well and add some more dark, and all that helps to give that feeling of shape, character and structure to the tree, which really makes them come to life. Now once I've done the central tree, I'm going to do similar for the other trees, but I'm going to add a little bit more blue because they're a little bit further away. So once again, the big tree trunk, and then work up the smaller branches and get them to subdivide and generally get a feel for the overall shape of the trees. I'm not putting the cascaded small branches in yet. That was going to be done with another treatment later, but I want to get that general feel of the skeleton of the tree. After completing the trees, I'm also going to use this similar grey with a little bit of blue to put some of the benches and some of the paraphernalia that goes around the bowling green. So what we do now, we then repeat this process on the left and put the big tree in and put the other trees in the background. Once again, the yellow ochre is the underwash, and then we put the dark on top, and we'll get that lovely three-dimensional look to these trees again. Okay, so now we're going to revisit the centre and the background, and what we're going to do is we're going to put those a little bit more structure to those diffused trees, and I'm going to use raw umber with a little bit of yellow ochre in the centre, and then as I move towards the sides I'm going to add a little bit more blue to it just so it gets a little bit of a colour change. That's all going to be delicately dropped in, and I'm going to tease out a little bit of detail here and there. It is now very much on the dry, but nonetheless I'm going to put some wet washes in place, and I'm going to drop in a little bit of detail around these wet washes, trying to give that feeling of some of the tree trunks, the distant trees, and some of the distant bushes that surround not just the house, the pavilion if you like, but also those woodlands in the background. Okay, so we're now going to start to deal with the buildings. We're going to start with the one in the centre, which is the pavilion for the bowling green. Add some darks in there. I've got some darks in my dark palette, which I'm going to utilise, which is basically the blue and the browns at this stage. I'm also going to add a little bit of Chinese white onto the roof, just to give a little bit of light onto the roof that's being captured by the sun. I'm gradually going to build in some darks into the pavilion, in particularly on the ground level and under the eaves of the roofs. Once that's settling in, I'm then going to mix some cadmium red with a little bit of crimson. I'm going to drop in the other building that's on the right hand side, which is very much just diffusing from the mist, and I'm just put that in, and that'll just be sufficient for there, just suggestive for that bit. And once I've done that, I'll then come back into the centre again and put some more darks around the building. And then once it's dried, I'm then going to put some darks in, further darks around the building, and into the trees in the distance as well, just to give it that little bit more shape. Not too much shape, but just enough shape to capture the feeling of the trees. Okay, so now we're on to a really exciting part. This is the bit that really brings the trees to life and gives them that extra bit of magic. And what we're going to do is we're going to paint the small branches, but we're just going to give the impression of the small branches. First of all, let's mix the colour. I'm going to use cobalt blue burnt sienna. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to fill my brush up. I'm going to use the side of the brush, not the tip, the side of the brush. Load my brush up, practice it on a little bit of a paper to one side, and then holding the brush horizontal, virtually flat, I'm going to drag it on the surface around the tree branches and the small branches in the trees. I drag that on, and what you'll get is a drag brush effect of letting the light come through as well as putting the shade. So you're going to capture those small branches. And if you can do this just delicately, just drag it on quite quickly, you'll get a lovely effect of that broken light coming through the trees. Although it's a combination of just the two colours, which is the cobalt blue and the burnt sienna, what we can do to really capture the feeling of, again, the light in the centre, I'm going to use more of a blue mix on the edges, and then in the centre I'm going to use a little bit more of a brown mix to it, so you get that little bit of colour change even in the small branches. And if you get that right, it really makes the trees come to life, and it really makes it look magical. So I'm going to work this process right through all the trees. So obviously we started on the left and we're going to finish on the right. So for this next stage, I'm going to add a little bit more detail to the benches and some of the fences around the bowling green. But I've also realised I've just missed a tree, so I'm going to drop that in now. It's just the one that's in front of the pavilion. Drop that in. I'm also going to put a little edge to the pathway that comes from the distance into the foreground, and a few shadows as well, just in the distance, just to give a feeling of light and shade. Okay, so we're now going to deal with the foreground again. It's mostly on the dry, and what I'm going to use to get some lovely golden brown to give that feeling of those autumnal leaves that are on the ground. Drop those in, add a little bit of purple in there, which will be little and crimson essentially, and probably a bit of purple lake, just to give that bit of colour change. Building it up to make sure it's a bit darker in the foreground particularly, allowing the other underwash to come through in parts as well, so it's a bit of a broken drag brush affair. I'm then going to go into the pathway. The pathway is more, I want to reflect the sky, to be honest, in the pathway. So I'm going to go for the cadmium red weak with a little bit of blue in there, just to give that feeling of light on the pathway. And then I want to work over to the right in the foreground, which is going to be much deeper and darker. I'm going to get some greens there, ultramarine blue, and a bit of cobalt turquoise, and a bit of purple in there, in that green area. Mix something up to make something that's quite darkish and purple. Add a bit of yellow in there as well, probably as well, just to give it a bit more of a green, and just cascade that into the foreground, particularly on the right hand side, and that will give a nice feeling of depth to the foreground. Once you've added that little bit of detail in the foreground, it's more tone in the foreground, I think you've pretty much got there. I might go and have a re-look at it once it's dry with a few darks here and there. You could even put a few figures in if you want to, but that's sort of capturing the essence of the scene, and hopefully we'll have a nice effective mood and atmospheric picture. Okay, so there we have it. I've put a mount around the painting, and we've got that mood and atmosphere painting at Sowerby Hall. I hope you've enjoyed that. I did. I think it worked. I think it works really well, and hopefully we've unlocked a bit of the magic, not only in capturing mood and atmosphere, but also in how to capture some realistic trees using some really simple techniques. But those simple techniques need a bit of practice, but once you practice them and you can grasp them, you can really capture some really effective scenes. So it's been really one to study, one to have a go. Hope you have some good practice. Please don't forget to send us some feedback. Do put some comments in below. Have a go yourself. Let me know how you get on. And it's great to really sort of be engaged with so many of you. I mean, we've got over 4,000 people now on the channel, which is fantastic. And a big thank you to everybody. And we've got also 1,000 people using the watercolour guide. And please send your comments. We'll endeavour to sort of incorporate them in future videos. Or if you've just got some queries about watercolour itself, please, I'll happily answer them as best I can. And also, we've just hit 4,000 subscribers on the channel, which is a big thank you to you. Those of you that subscribed, obviously there's many of you I know watching that haven't subscribed, but please do. If you like these sort of material, please do like and subscribe, and also click the bell. That means that you'll get notification on future videos. And it's been a really terrific enjoyment and the real celebration of watercolour. So I hope you enjoy it and you enjoy future videos. We're also developing an online course which has got 11 full paintings alongside notes for everyone, which shows you the tips and techniques in greater depth than I'm showing here, and it's just one to be aware of, and obviously we'll make more about it when we get nearer the time. But in the meantime, enjoy and keep painting.